Border battle. The State Department says new U.S.-led airstrikes near the Syrian border are keeping ISIS fighters at bay. Close to home, the first Ebola patient diagnosed in the U.S. dies as plans to screen for Ebola at U.S. airports are outlined. Synod synopsis. The leader of the U.S. Catholic bishops offers his take on the first few days of the Synod on the family. And a gift of love. A new state-of-the-art exhibit opens at Washington's St. John Paul II National Shrine. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, October 8th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Islamic State militants are closing in on a strategic Syrian city near the Turkish border. Today, President Obama is huddling with top U.S. military leaders. Jason Calvi reports from the White House tonight. Jason?
Brian, U.S. commanders are briefing the president on the strategy to defeat the Islamic State. For 2 months, American bombs have pounded ISIS, but still they're not destroyed, and even now are on the verge of taking yet another city.
ISIS is battling to take over the northern Syrian city of Kobani. It's right over the border from Turkey. The Islamic State has more guns than the Kurdish forces protecting the city. U.S.-led coalition planes have pounded about a dozen targets near the town, causing cheers on the Turkish side of the border. But the Pentagon says the battle won't be won from the air alone, that local ground forces are needed.
Airstrikes alone are not going to do this, not going to fix this, not going to save the town of Kobani.
Secretary of State John Kerry says it's important to keep Kobani out of the militants' hands, but there's a larger policy at work.
We're trying to deprive the ISIL of the overall ability to wage this, not just in Kobani, but throughout Syria and into Iraq.
The fighting is also causing a refugee crisis. A few miles from Kobani, 20,000 people are in a refugee camp. Iraqi Kurds are checking in on them and say more needs to be done.
We are trying to put a lot of pressure on the West and the coalition fighting ISIS to provide the same support to Kobani that is provided to the Kurdish regional government.
The U.S. says it also wants more action and is asking Turkey to do more in order to stop ISIS just across their border.
And the White House is sending retired General John Allen to Turkey to discuss fighting ISIS. A big boost yesterday from Canada, whose parliament agreed to start airstrikes against the Islamic State in Iraq. Brian?
Jason Calvi at the White House tonight. Thank you, Jason. A Franciscan priest and about 20 of his parishioners are believed to have been abducted in Syria. The Vatican reports Father Hana Jalouf is kidnapped Sunday by members of the Al-Nusra Front. His parish is in a town controlled by ISIS, not the Syrian government. Father Jalouf was reportedly traveling to an Islamic court to report harassment of his parishioners when he disappeared. The Franciscan Custody of the Holy Land's website says there's been no contact with the priest or his captors. And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The first Ebola patient diagnosed here in the United States died today. Thomas Eric Duncan was pronounced dead in Dallas this morning. He contracted Ebola in Liberia but did not show symptoms until he came to the U.S. Health officials are monitoring others in Dallas who came in direct contact with Duncan. Emergency responders are also closely watching a patient who is now exhibiting signs and symptoms of Ebola who claims he had contact with Duncan. State officials say there is no indication that he actually did. Duncan's death comes as the U.S. announces American airports will screen body temperatures of passengers who arrive from countries with Ebola. 5 international airports, New York's JFK, Newark, Washington Dulles, Chicago, and Atlanta, will begin fever screenings on Saturday. American Ebola survivor Dr. Kent Brantley is donating blood to help a cameraman who contracted the deadly disease. The blood is expected to arrive at the Nebraska Medical Center, where Ashoka Mukpo is being treated. This is the second time Brantley's blood is being used to help an Ebola patient. He also donated to Dr. Rick Sacra, the first Ebola patient treated at that same Nebraska hospital. A second nursing assistant is among 4 potential Ebola cases under investigation in Madrid, Spain. Around 50 people are being monitored after a Spanish nurse's assistant contracted Ebola, the first such case outside West Africa. The Spanish hospital is not revealing her condition, citing privacy reasons. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy's temporary hold on gay unions in Idaho does not apply to Nevada. The justice issued two confusing rulings today. The first blocked same-sex unions in Idaho at the request of state officials there. The ruling was thought to also apply to Nevada, but Kennedy later issued a clarification saying it doesn't. Yesterday, a court of appeals in San Francisco declared gay marriage legal in both of those states. On Monday, the Supreme Court turned away state appeals, effectively legalizing so-called same-sex marriage in several states, bringing the total number of states now to 30. 2 Americans and 1 German are winners of this year's Nobel Prize in Chemistry. The 3 worked together on optical microscopy. This science increases our understanding of molecules, allowing us to see their functions. One of the winners, a researcher at Virginia's Howard Hughes Medical Institute, has mixed reactions to the award.
It's kind of like 50% happiness and 50% fear, because I don't want my life to change. I really like my life, and I'm busy enough already.
Their work allows scientists to see how proteins in fertilized eggs divide into embryos and also track proteins associated with diseases such as Parkinson's. Leaders of each of the world's Catholic bishops' conferences are attending the Synod on the Family in Rome this week. Louisville Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, president of the USCCB, discussed the Synod today with our Rome correspondent Alan Holdren.
Archbishop, is there a crisis in the way the Church reaches out to families today?
Let's face it, Alan, every family walking through life in a journey, I hope, towards heaven, will face challenges. But I think the primary one is this loss or this need to restore confidence that somehow this couple, this family, can have a fruitful and a successful marriage, that they're not just a statistic. They're not at the mercy of statistics.
It's been said in the Synod discussions that the Church needs to change the language it uses. Do you agree with that?
This is something that the Church has done in every age, isn't it? I mean, the Church takes the great teaching of Christ, and our Holy Father has told us, hey, this is not a doctrinal synod. We're not coming together to change doctrine, but rather we're looking at what is the pastoral, and I would say the creative pastoral way in which we are able to reach out and welcome. Our Holy Father has really given us a couple of clues. He says, accompany that person into the light of Christ.
And specifically about same-sex relationships, the Church has called them in the past intrinsically disordered. That's language that they're saying shouldn't be used now. What do you think the Church can still speak the truth while changing its language?
I think what we will need to do is speak about the beauty of the gift of sexuality, the meaning of sexuality, the meaning of friendships, and then the unique friendship, which is that union of man and woman joined together, 2 flesh as one, open to children, the union that Jesus himself talked about.
USCCB President Archbishop Joseph Kurtz talking with our Alan Holdren in Rome today. Well, a theme of this week's Synod has been bringing the Church's message about marriage and sexuality to a wider audience. A husband and wife from the U.S. visiting St. Peter's Square today say many couples really need this message.
I hope that they just have a plan to reintroduce or educate people about the great blessings of the sacrament of marriage, and not just, better marriage preparation, clarity on some things, because I think, a lot of people go into marriage not assuming it's a sacrament forever.
The Catholic Association's Maureen Ferguson is here to talk about the Synod a little bit more. The last time the bishops got together for a Synod, they were discussing the new evangelization. I wonder if overcomplicated language or maybe even the perception of judgmentalism has impeded this evangelization effort.
I think certainly it has. And, these truths about marriage are really rooted in very deep theological, philosophical principles. And people in our contemporary culture simply aren't educated about these things. They don't understand it. And they dismiss these teachings as old-fashioned. They have no relevance to me. So it's a challenge for the Church to find new ways to communicate these beautiful truths about God's amazing plan for marriage and family.
They can certainly tap into St. John Paul II's theology of the body. body, because it puts it so succinctly.
Absolutely, but even that really needs to be boiled down to communicate in a way that people can hear it and take it to heart. And I loved what the Archbishop was saying about communicating in terms of beauty, because it is a beautiful vision, God's plan for marriage and family.
Indeed it is. A phrase we're hearing out of this synod is the law of gradualism. What is that?
Sure. Well, I guess probably the easiest way to understand it is that people come to conversion gradually, hence the law of gradualism. So, you know, most of us, when we came to our faith, weren't knocked off the horse like St. Paul, but most people come to the faith in baby steps. So this law of gradualism is kind of saying, let's encourage those baby steps. Let's not dismiss them as not being in full communion, but let's encourage those baby steps. Let's see how we can keep people moving in the right direction to draw them closer to Christ.
That would seem to be much more effective than trying to do it all at once. So after Vatican II, the idea that people outside of the Catholic Church still hold some truth kind of revolutionized the way we relate to non-Catholic Christians. I wonder if that same approach might apply to Catholics who feel outed, maybe divorced, remarried Catholics, gay people.
Well, certainly the Church needs to develop this new language, and one of the phrases they were talking about in the Synod in the last couple days is this phrase, living in sin, which, you know, since the Garden of Eden, don't we all live in a state of sin every day, right? This is why we need the sacrament of confession, right? But it fails to communicate what it's trying to communicate, to challenge people. You know, one example of this law of gradualism might be a few weeks ago we read in the press about the Pope marrying several couples at St. Peter's. And the press reported on those couples as, you know, some of them had been living together prior to marriage. And the implication in the press reports was kind of that, no big deal. Live together before you're married, get married at St. Peter's, which the message really was intended to be the opposite, to challenge these couples and others living like them in this state of limbo.
Draw them into a sacramental
Draw them
marriage.
into the beauty of the sacrament of marriage. Challenge them to step up and make that commitment and be not afraid.
We'll talk more in future days. The Catholic Association's Maureen Ferguson, thank you for visiting us.
Good to be with you.
Coming up, we explore the University of Notre Dame's innovative approach to teaching teachers. And Highlights for Children magazine surveys kids about their distracted parents. It's Wednesday, October 8th, and you're watching EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, today's parents may be putting their cell phones before their kids, at least from time to time. That from a State of the Kid report released today by Highlights, the iconic kids magazine. More than 1,000 children ages 6 to 12 answered questions about their lives at home, at school, and after work. 62% of the kids said their parents were too distracted to listen. Highlights asked the kids, what's distracting parents? The top answer, cell phones, 28%. That's followed by siblings, work, often on laptops, and TV. A third of kids surveyed said mealtimes are the best time to talk with parents. 29% said bedtime, 18% said in the car. The survey also reports on how kids know their parents are listening. 56% said when parents look at them and make direct eye contact. 28% said when they actually respond, and 11% said when they stop what they're doing. We're joined on Skype by Christine French-Cully, editor-in-chief of Highlights magazine. Love your magazine. I remember it as a kid. It's devoted to helping the well-being of kids. What do you think is the remedy for the distracted parents? Obviously, kids feel their parents can't really pay attention to them.
Yes. You know, at Highlights, we believe children are the world's most important people, and we believe passionately in the importance of leaning in and listening to your children. And I think if we lean in and listen to what kids told us in this survey, it's a real wake-up call for all of us.
Certainly. And of course, kids are so into technology as well. Many of them report being tired at school. Can that go back to technology, do you think?
You know, a few years ago in this survey, we did talk about that. We asked kids if you had an extra hour in the day, what would you do with it? And I think we expected a different answer, but the majority of the kids said they'd sleep. And we think probably technology might have something to do with that, particularly with older children. They use it a lot at night.
So your survey takes the temperature of today's kids. What are some of the other highlights that stuck out to you from the survey?
Well, we also asked kids about their attitudes towards school. We wondered, there's so much change going on in education right now. We wondered how that was impacting kids. And half of them told us that they do indeed experience school-related stress. The number one stressor related to school is tests, followed by math class and bad grades.
Well, that probably hasn't changed that much over the years, do you think?
Well, probably not, but I do think the educational environment has changed a lot. There is much more focus on accountability, and there are many more tests, I think, than we took when we were kids. So it's really not a surprise, but it's good for parents to know. They need to watch for the signs of stress in their kids.
Christine French-Cully, editor-in-chief of Highlights Magazine, joining us by Skype tonight. Thank you, Christine. I'm looking forward to reading more about the survey in Highlights.
Thank you so much.
So many people my age were taught by religious sisters and brothers who lived in community. Well, Mark Irons discovers a new crop of Catholic lay teachers who form small communities of their own.
Growing up, Kevin Coughlin got some advice from his dad.
My dad always told me, he goes, you can be anything you want to be, just don't be a teacher.
Guys, it's just a gift. But Kevin didn't follow that advice and is now teaching English class at Archbishop Kurtz High School in Washington, D.C. Annie Trotta is also a teacher, one floor down. But the two aren't just teachers. They're also students with the Alliance for Catholic Education, or ACE. The University of Notre Dame runs the 2-year fellowship. Father Lou Delfra has worked with ACE for 20 years.
Our applicants are, on the whole, not education majors.
ACE students spend a summer learning teaching methods at Notre Dame and then spread across the country in groups. This year, 178 fellows are teaching classes at under-resourced Catholic schools.
We're introducing really talented young men and women into the teaching profession in Catholic schools. We try to surround them with pastoral support during their years. It's a really hard 2 years.
First-year teacher Aletha Duchesne has relied on her faith in God.
I find myself praying to Him over the littlest things, but it has relieved so much of my anxiety and my frustration.
Teaching can be tough. That's why ACE teachers also have the support of a community. There are 31 communities around the country. In D.C., 7 teachers live in a group home.
I know that I can talk to my peers about how the day went, about how I could improve, about what went well.
Back in the classroom, Kevin and Annie are on year 2 of teaching. In exchange for their service, they'll graduate with a cost-free master's in education from Notre Dame.
One of the statistics we're most proud of in ACE is after 20 years, 70% of our participants are still in education. The overwhelming majority stay in Catholic school.
In 21 years, ACE has produced over 1,300 teaching fellows, a win for student teachers and Catholic schools. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, will the Catholic vote make a difference next month? Is there even such a thing? We'll discuss. And we tour a new exhibit on the life of St. John Paul II at his National Shrine here in Washington. On Wednesday, the 8th of October, this is EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick, and visitors to Washington can now relive the life and legacy of St. John Paul II. His National Shrine here is opening a new world-class exhibit celebrating the first Polish Pope. Wyatt Goolsby takes us on a quick tour tonight.
The work is on to expand and upgrade the St. John Paul II National Shrine. Underneath the first floor construction on the lower level, you'll find the latest addition, a state-of-the-art exhibit called A Gift of Love, the life of St. John Paul II. From films to interactive displays, the exhibit features 9 different galleries covering some 16,000 square feet. The Shrine's executive director, Patrick Kelly, says plans for the exhibit have been in the works for 3 years.
It's a truly unique experience in the history of the world, I think, where one comes to a shrine dedicated to a saint, a great saint, this great man of the 20th century, but they come to an exhibit that teaches them about his life, and in a very in-depth and particular way.
Kelly is with the Knights of Columbus, who run the shrine. Their organization has even been able to acquire personal items like JP2 skis and tennis shoes.
In addition to walking through the history of John Paul II, visitors to the shrine will also have the chance to delve a little bit more deeply into his spirituality. Throughout the exhibit, you'll find different images of the Virgin Mary. In particular, John Paul II is known for having a devotion to Our Lady, praying the Rosary a lot. So it's that element of both the spirituality as well as the history that really makes the exhibit unique.
And just as John Paul II allowed the Holy Spirit to guide him through the most difficult situations in his life, Kelly says the exhibit encourages visitors to do the same.
Holiness, really. Holiness is possible in the unique and personal circumstances of their life.
And it's the legacy of St. John Paul II's holiness that continues to inspire the faithful to this day. In Washington, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
That exhibit is now open to the public. The shrine hosts a formal inauguration October 22nd, the first feast of St. John Paul II. We're grateful to the Knights of Columbus for supporting the shrine, as well as EWTN News Nightly. Brian Bertsch joining us. He's president of CatholicVote.org. This is a Catholic-based advocacy group. So CatholicVote.org is a grassroots movement to rally Catholics to what?
Rally Catholics to live more faithfully the truths expressed by our Holy Father through the Magisterium, the social doctrine of the Church as applied to the American public life.
But there really is no clear-cut Catholic vote as such. Catholics cross party lines. They vote against one another on various issues. Does that affect your mission, or is that what your mission is about?
No, the Catholic vote more broadly reflects the general American public. But what we're focused on primarily is what we call active Catholics. Those are Catholics who attend Mass on a regular basis, ideally once a week or more, and that is approximately 3 to 5% of the electorate, which is still a significant number, particularly in some states.
Do you think they'll vote together?
They absolutely can, especially if we get out there, let them know what's at stake, let them know why their vote matters, even in places where they may think there's nothing of significance on the ballot. Every single vote does matter in every election.
There seems to be a lot of yawning over the midterm elections. Those of us who will vote, what should we know going into this?
You need to know that midterms traditionally are elections when people stay home. Everyone loves a vote in a presidential election. They're not always excited about midterm elections. So your vote doubly counts in a midterm election. Despite the lack of hype, the lack of attention it receives, this election is truly going to be a historic one.
You guys have produced some very powerful television spots. Probably your best known shows an ultrasound image of a child in the womb, and you go on to list the reasons that people give for aborting babies. They all applied to a baby who grew up to be the president. How did people respond to this spot?
Well, we thought we had something unique on our hands, but we had no idea until we actually released it. We actually released it on Black Entertainment Television, and the response was instantaneous. The video received millions of views on YouTube. We didn't promote it in any way. It was simply viral, and it was a truly remarkable spot because it allowed people to think in a different way about how the Catholic Church understands not only the position of life, but a political leader, a president in this respect that was very hostile to us.
When I first saw that spot, I thought, how can you argue with this? There is no argument against it.
Well, that's exactly what we were told by a lot of people, including a lot of feminist groups that wrote in, that were angry with us, but acknowledged that it was very, very creative. It allowed us to affirm that despite our opposition to abortion, that the church is not a church of no, it's a church of yes, even for a president who is against us.
All right, you have a new book, The American Catholic Almanac. It includes famous Americans who are little-known Catholics. Just quick example of a couple of those.
Buffalo Bill, converted on his deathbed. Alfred Hitchcock, Gene Kranz, the head of mission control for Apollo 13. All Catholics that had profound impact on American history.
The American Catholic Almanac, and Brian Bertsch with CatholicVote.org. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Well, until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on Anytime on YouTube. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Finally, we tag along with two young Italian boys invited by Pope Francis for the ride of a lifetime in St. Peter's Square. Good night, and God bless you.